Hello, I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Nicholas. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
The scene is set. You're walking through a beautiful, lush forest, enjoying an afternoon hike, and you accidentally bump into a tree. Thinking nothing of it, you continue on your way until you start to feel movement on the back of your neck. And then the tickly sensation turns into irritation, and soon it becomes a burn. Fire, even. You shake your head vigorously and see multiple tiny ants fall onto the ground. You don't recognize them, but you soon notice that there are hundreds of them in multiple trees around you. This tiny ant has become a huge problem. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Hello. I've got one question for you right off the bat, Kirsten.
Yes,
Is this episode longer than normal?
I'm not sure. Why is that?
Because I thought maybe we could market it as the giant episode.
Oh, no. Okay. Nicholas, you're fired.
Hey, I didn't have a lot of time. While you were doing the intro, I was very vigorously searching for ant puns, and there are not a lot of good ones, as it turns out.
Okay, so all of you who depend on puns for your daily interactions, stay away from ants.
Oh, wait, sorry, just I gotta do one more. Do you know what the biggest species of ant in the world is?
What?
The elephant.
Oh, there we go. Dun-dun. Okay, all right. Are you done, Nicholas?
Probably not.
All right, that's probably what people are looking forward to, so don't worry about it. Okay, people. Well, apparently we are a little bit tired today, but we are super excited to be here and we're having a great time. And we hope that everybody here listening has been enjoying what we're doing so far and that they keep enjoying it. So today we're actually talking about a little ant that packs a big punch. The little fire ant, Wasmannia auropunctata, which is a cool name, but it's really a big issue. Now, this is a tiny ant, really tiny. Like if you drop it while getting it from a sample tube to your microscope, you might lose it tiny.
What is this?
A center for ants!
Not that I'm speaking from experience at all, but yes, anyway, it's about 1.5 millimeters, which is 0.06 inches. Thinking of my American friends today. Yeah, and it's a reddish brown gold color. Up close, it looks like an ant. It's actually super hard to ID without a microscope, but their distinct features when you do get them under a microscope is they have these super large, in comparison to their body, shoulder spikes, and these in ants are called petioles, and they kind of come off of the where you would call the shoulder of an ant if it had shoulders, and they come backwards. So that's the first part of it, and then they also have clubbed antennae and various stiff hairs throughout the body, which is more common in ants than I knew before I started working in entomology, that they have all these little hairs on them. And then the Wasmannia auropunctata as well, they have these kind of wrinkly foreheads, these deep grooves that come sort of above their eyes and down when you're looking at them face like with their face towards you, which really helps to ID them from other ones. If my description isn't doing it for you, let's be real here that you're probably just going to go Google a photo anyways, so let's move on. All
If you
right.
haven't seen a fire ant in your life, also, where have you been? I mean, I know there's different species, but like, come on, go outside.
Right. This is a good point time to note out that there is tropical fire ants, which are Solenopsis species. I can't remember the species, I'm sorry. And then there's the little fire ant too, but essentially they look quite similar, and this is what makes them hard to ID if you don't have a microscope. Yeah, so as well, these are in the subfamily Myrmicinae, which is a huge subfamily of ants. It's ridiculous how many different kinds of ants there are. So again, you really have to get them up close to identify them for well or really well. They're classified as generalists, but they have this super cool feeding behavior, which I'm actually going to talk about in the why they're so bad section. So stay tuned for that one. Hold tight. I want you guys to stick around for that. So also, they can live in the ground or on trees. They just need some vegetation, and they seem to actually also do okay in either wet or dry climates and in natural or anthropogenic habitats. So you guys can see where I'm going with this. They're really good at just being everywhere.
Well, actually, they can't see where you're going with this. This is a podcast, it's audio only.
I keep using the word see. I'm sure you can hear where I'm going with this.
That's better. Also, pretty much all I'm going to be offering to this podcast is stupid jokes because I really don't know anything about insects at all. This is all your area of expertise. This is not like I am very uncomfortable right now because usually I have like some sort of general background or like I've worked with something in the past. No, nothing at all. Outside of the emerald ash borer, coming soon to an episode near you, I have no experience working with any sort of insects other than Japanese beetles, also coming to an episode near you soon. But like for real, like so ants especially, nothing. I've got nothing. So all I've got right now is puns. And I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. That's all I've got. I do have one question as an uneducated person who is looking up ant puns and not necessarily paying attention the whole time. Are these the same as the like I've seen them called not necessarily fire ants because that's like a general term, but like Argentinian ants? Or is that something else?
These ones could be because they are part of their native range is in Argentina, which we will get to, but pause for please put some elevator music in here while I go and check out the other
I got you
for them.
Okay, so what was the scientific name for the ant species, or at least the
Wasmannia auropunctata.
Okay, so the Argentinian ants that I was referencing, they are Linnapithema, which means that they're a different species, which I think is a different invasive species of ant, and they are the only species of ant I know anything about. So I have even less to offer now to this podcast episode. So I apologize. I guess that's kind of the point. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So I will play the part of the completely dumb person. So you take it away, and I'll sit back and learn.
Right, that's okay. This actually little interlude there plays a nice part to highlight the problems around common names, where common names are different in different parts, and it gets really confusing. Now, to be honest, here's my little ecologist confession. I'm terrible with scientific names. I have to look at them like 4 or 5 times and drill them into my brain before I remember. So that's why we use common names. But if you're a budding ecologist and biologist, get better at scientific names. That is my advice to you. Anyway, off we go. So, as I was saying, these ants are good everywhere. The only thing that they don't do is bury down into the ground a lot, which actually is an advantage that we'll look at again later. Now, the super interesting thing that I found about them is they can actually have more than one reproducing queen in a nest. So this is called polygyny. And so most ants, that most people are familiar with, have one queen and all of the workers. But these ones can, within one nest, have multiple queens, which again is going to cause even more problems with them as an invasive species. So you can hear where I'm going with this. The big thing with this is their sting. Now, these are called little fire ants for a reason. I luckily have not had the opportunity to be stung by one yet, but it is supposedly really painful and long lasting. So this is the problem, that it causes a rash and irritation. Now, if you're not actually allergic to them, it's not something that's going to be fatal or cause really big issues, but it's really uncomfortable. And if you get a bunch of them on you, it's a horrible feeling, and people say it lasts forever. Now, they're not noted as particularly aggressive ants towards people, but it depends who you speak to. And they're going to sting when they're threatened, or when they're pressed in close, or when they feel like they're being attacked. So in cases of like fruit picking, for example, it's impossible for people to not make contact and be stung, right? So this is also a really good point to point out that you are stung by an ant and not bit. Now, ants can totally bite, especially in the case of like trap jaw ants and stuff. But a lot of people say, it bit me. But things are generally, if you're getting that burning sensation, it's because you're being stung and you're being injected. So this is in terms of insects in general, like wasps and those kind of things. The ants can totally bite you, but it's not going to cause this kind of reaction.
It's a venom, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a venom, and they use it. They use it in predation because these are generalists at predation and in defense. So they're generalists, so they will go and sting prey to try to immobilize it, and then they're also using it as a defense, and it's very effective, especially against large mammals and things that are gonna have these reactions like we do.
Stinging's the only thing they know. It's their way. Oh, an angel of mercy will come forward to suck the poison from my healing buckets.
And these are similar to other types of ants where they basically don't just necessarily one ant stings a prey item, but they all considerably, gang up on a piece of prey and overwhelm it by stinging it multiple times and overwhelming it with pain or paralysis or whatever. So they a bunch of them sting one particular thing at the same time.
Exactly. There are a few different ant species, which I've learned quite recently, that are solitary foragers, but it's very rare. And these tend to be like large ants in like the Ectotoma genus, or there's one, the Giantopus, sorry, which is a super cool ant. If you Google it, they have the biggest eyes of any ant, and it's because they can jump, and they're these like solitary. They're like the wolves of the ants. They're super neat if you want to check those out. But yeah, on that note, they forage in groups. You'll see them if you've ever seen fire ants. You'll see them in a huge swarm. And they're tiny and you can't make them out, but it kind of ends up just being this reddish gold river as they move along.
And they're unable to sting each other. Well, if they sting each other, it doesn't necessarily do anything, right?
That I would have to check, but a lot of ants are actually super territorial, and these ones are as well, and they will probably not sting their own colony members because they actually use different kinds of pheromones and stuff to recognize each other, but the sting should actually be effective against other ants in theory. Yep.
Right, but within the same species, they probably have some sort of biological defense against it, so that it wouldn't necessarily affect them, meaning that they would be resistant.
You were just using that whole thing to lead up to
I've
that,
been
weren't
setting
you?
up this joke for like 5 minutes. So if anybody's like, why is he speaking so weird and precisely? It's because I've been setting up a stupid pun for 5 minutes. Back to you.
Don't hurt yourself, Nicholas. Anyway, yeah, some ants though do I definitely want to do an episode at some point, coming to an episode near you, on these raider ants that do actually live off of attacking other ant nests, but we'll see if we can work that into invasive or not, or if we'll just do it because I feel like it. Anywho, so let's get into where this ant is from. Now, so the little fire ants, I selected these guys because they are a huge invasive species in a lot of places, but they actually have a really large native range as well. So they're in a lot of places. Now, one note that I've seen in a couple papers is it might be hard to know the actual true original range before we started moving them around as well. So that's something to note. However, they are native to neotropical lowland forests, and they're common in these areas, but they're not necessarily dominant. But they definitely explode outside of that range. Now, this is something that, again, we talk about seeing a lot in invasive species, that in their native range, it's not like they're all over the place. And that's because of the checks and balances that an ecosystem has when they've evolved together, right? So you get an ant, but of course it has predators and it has competitors. But when it gets into a new region, it's exploding because it doesn't have these normal kind of checks and balances that it does, and these normal competition and predation that it does in its native range. But it's native to parts of Central and South America, but not all countries and all places. In our resources page in the show notes, you guys can see the full list. But we have Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Guyana, Mexico, Peru, Puerto Rico, Haiti, St. Lucia, Uruguay, Venezuela, the Virgin Islands, and the USA. It's quite a list. They are quite widespread in what is considered their native range. Now, the part we're all waiting for, where is it invasive? Now, according to the IUCN, these guys are in the top 100 most invasive species in the world. So they
Wow, what
are
a title to hold.
right? Little fire ant, but he's definitely up in the 100. Now, of course, some people are like 100, that's a lot, but there are a lot of invasive species, and you guys will hopefully get to see that with us, as we will never in our entire lifetime be able to cover all the invasive species in the world.
Well, not with that attitude.
All right, well, somebody's going to have to start paying me for this. Anyway, so where is it listed as invasive? Get ready. Australia, Cameroon, Canada, Cook Islands, Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands specifically, French Polynesia, Gabon, Israel, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, United Kingdom, United States, Vanuatu, sorry, and Wallis and Futuna. So it's a big list. Now, in the places that are a little bit more temperate and cooler, like the UK and Canada, they're mostly invasive in greenhouses because they have a really good tolerant range for temperature, but not that great because they are a neotropical ant species. So they're more invasive in greenhouses, which is super interesting, but they're causing a problem because in these places where it's cold in the winter, we have these big greenhouses that help produce food in colder weather. So that is a problem.
There's actually other species too that typically colonize greenhouses in temperate climates because they can't necessarily survive. Recently, in northern Illinois, a Brahminy blind snake was found in somebody's basement, which was likely there from potted plants that they had in their house. So it's not a species that could necessarily survive outside. It is a species that survives in Florida as an invasive species, but it can't survive in northern Illinois as far as we know. And so this discovery, people were kind of baffled by it. It was actually discovered by a friend of mine, and nobody could figure out why because they had no potted plants in the house. So they had to do a whole, essentially, they had to do a whole look over of what they had bought and things like that. And I think it came in just some potting soil that they had bought for something else. So it's crazy to think that some species are so small, ants and these small snakes being two examples of them, that they can be invasive within essentially a human created environment.
Right, enclosed spaces that have temperature control, that keep us comfortable or surviving in the harsh climates, keep species like this. I mean, this is what maintains the most invasive primate worldwide, being us. So why couldn't it go ahead and also maintain other species, right? Interesting.
Right. And that it's almost scary to think about too, with, rising average global temperatures and things like that, and range expansion happening because of increasing temperatures. If these invasive species are already colonized in these little boxed in artificial ecosystems further north, if the climate continues to rise and get warmer and these species are able to establish outside, then they already have a foothold in these areas that they would normally never be in. So that's kind of a scary thought. So good luck sleeping tonight, knowing that ants could be in Alaska soon.
Today in the Anthropocene.
Yeah. Woo-hoo.
No, but for real, guys, climate change is scary. But that's a whole nother can of worms, and we're not gonna get too deep into that in this podcast. I mean, it's gonna make an appearance almost all the time, but that's definitely not our focus here. All right. So, unfortunately, nobody wants to listen to me all day. So, I narrowed down on 2 places to kind of take a look at for the Wasmannia auropunctata. So, I'm going to touch a little bit on Hawaii, and then I'm also going to focus in on the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. Now, these cases are really interesting to me, for one, because they're something that comes up right away when you look into these guys. And then as well, they are both island ecosystems. Now, islands are especially sensitive to change, right? And why would that be? So, we already talked to everybody here a little bit about how invasive species are so bad because they come into a place without checks and balances, right? Now, when you get an island, there's this extra layer of isolation in an ecosystem, right? So things have evolved together like they have in any community, but now they are only used to having themselves, and there's not as much over like geological history. There hasn't been as much flux there. So you get things that are just they're just way more sensitive, and also like harder to get rid of these things sometimes. And being an island, it's absolutely 100% sure that we brought it there, because the Galapagos, for example, is 2,400 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. It's about 1,400 miles. So they didn't float over there on a log, though that happens sometimes. It was definitely brought in from us. Great. So my personal interaction with these guys too has been in the Amazon here in Ecuador. Now I've been working on some entomology projects here, and there is a lot of these little guys. And as I said, they're super tiny and hard to ID, but they're really interesting. Now, I couldn't seem to find anything about if they're noted as invasive in the Amazon in Ecuador, but they are in Galapagos. And if you go to Galapagos at any point, which you absolutely should, because it's incredible, it's an amazing, amazing national park. But you'll hear a lot all about them in the information centers because they are causing some problems. Okay, so how was it introduced? So this is an accidental introduction in almost all cases. So sometimes we get the purposeful introductions, but this one is an accident. So these are coming in exotic plants, in building materials from people moving. In a documentary from Hawaii, they were saying they even get into the carpets of cars and they move that way. So they just get into all the little holes everywhere, and they come in by accident.
And that's actually the case with a lot of invasive species as far as coming in via transportation. So if you move a boat from one lake to another, you can take the invasive species in the hull of your boat. If you move a car from one place to another, it can even be the seeds of an invasive plant that you ran over in the mud that stuck to the tires of your car. So it's always important to be really cognitive of what you're bringing, where you're bringing it, and what it may contain, because it could be completely and adversely detrimental to the ecosystem that you're bringing it to.
Right, exactly. And talking a little later about some control methods, we'll talk a little bit more about prevention and what's being done in that case. But yeah, just be conscious as an individual, right? Because a lot of us, I mean, it's easy to think that we don't have much of an impact as an individual, but you do, because one person, was the first person to bring little fire ants to Hawaii or to Galapagos. And of course, they came in with more people and other things, but we can make a difference by just being more careful with what we're moving and what might be on there, right?
Yeah, even if it's just wiping your boots off when you're going hiking. A lot of places have signs and things like that that talk about that now, but honestly, I really don't see that many people wiping their boots off in between forest preserves. It's not just seeds, it could be funguses, bacteria, chytrid, all that kind of fun stuff that you can bring just by moving between ecosystems. Of course, we have the ability to travel far between ecosystems in a very short period of time, which is great because we get to see so many things, but we have to be aware that our movements could be detrimental to those ecosystems, and we could be that first introduction of a new species. So that's why it's always important to do your research, understand sanitation and other methodology to prevent the colonization of new invasive species. If you care about nature, then take the extra time.
Right, do your part. Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead. We're gonna talk about the issues now. What are the issues around these guys? So I'm gonna just mention both ecosystems, Hawaiian Islands, and the Galapagos, and then I'll talk about the issues in general, because they're really similar in each habitat. The problems that these guys are causing. If there's something specific, I'll make sure I let you guys know. So in Hawaii, they arrived in Hawaii Island in 1999, and then in 2000 they were in Kauai, 2009 in Maui, 2013 in Oahu. So you can see them moving. So it's not even just that they're in one place, but there's a ton of different movement between the islands once they get there, right? So we have these infestations in multiple areas. And then as well in the Galapagos, you are getting them in Albany, Champion, Cousin, Eden, Española, Floriana, Isabella, Mao, Machena, Pizon. Now, these are the big islands and the little ones, right? San Cristobal, Santa Cruz, and Santa Fe, which we'll talk about later. They have been eradicated. Woo-hoo. and then Santiago and Seymour Norte. So you have a lot of islands, the big and the little ones, where we have these little guys. And of course, there's different magnitude of issues here. But according to Custonia and Sevilla, there's a report there in the show notes. They're in the top 6 most dangerous invertebrate to Galapagos. So there's a lot of focus on these guys specifically and trying to deal with them.
So obviously the main form of transportation for these ants between the islands of the Galapagos is probably human introduction and things like that. Is there any information to suggest that they do what other ants do and they float?
I have to check because I know the tropical fire ant, the Solenopsis, those guys, they build these like really impressive rafts. It's actually insane. Like they lock together and they can float. And these guys, I didn't actually look at it, but I bet you they can also go ahead and float.
I mean, if you make the assumption that pretty much all ant species are small enough that their surface area and essentially they float on top of water because of surface tension and things like that. So they're able to form these like balls of ants and these like big balls. And God, every episode,
Every single time.
it's balls. What the hell? It's got to be some subconscious thing at this point.
Probably.
Anyway, they form these like big balls of ants, and because of the surface tension in between each of the individual ants isn't enough to pull them down, they can float in these like en masse in these rafts between areas. And obviously like Galapagos Islands and stuff like that are not a freshwater ecosystem where they're traveling through there, so I don't know what salinity would have an effect on these, etc. But many insect and ant species can float long distances, at least through freshwater, by joining together and clinging together in these big balls. So
Right. Yeah, and confirming that looks like Wasmannia or Punctata can survive flood events by forming large floating mass of ants, if you'd like to use a different noun. And go ahead. Now
it's been
a
a
little
really long day.
Now, between the islands, this is going to be a little bit more complicated because it is ocean and it is crazy. Like in certain seasons and stuff, crossing Galapagos, it's 2 hours on the boat to get across. But the general note with invasive species is they are persistent and really tough. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's definitely some floating, and as well holding on to just floating vegetation, maybe a palm
Right.
leaf or a coconut or something as well. So definitely we're getting the human introduction, and then they do spread by their own means as well, of course.
Right. I mean, if you've got a high enough population of an invasive species on a concentrated singular island, then there's more chances for those species to move to adjacent islands via any number of means. So I guess it really doesn't matter how they got there because they're already there. I was just curious if there was anything that said that there was anything like that. It would be interesting to know if they can survive floating long distances in rough salt water. I mean, that'd be cool. We'll have to look that up at some point.
Right.
Or you can do it at home and save us the trouble.
Yeah, if you guys have never seen these ant rafts, they're really cool. And just a little plug, the National Geographic Overheard podcast recently had an episode about photography of these ant masses and stuff. So that's a really cool podcast for you guys to check out too. They don't need any more publicity, but it's one of the ones I enjoy for sure. All right, so now we know where they are and what are the issues. So these little guys, it's seen, I have a bunch of different papers sourced there in the show notes for you guys. They eradicate native ants in the areas that it appears. Now, they also seem to go ahead and lower the numbers of arachnids and other arthropods as well. So they're not just directly impacting other types of ants in the area, but they're pushing out other things as well. Now, so they're pushing out all these other things. How? Because for one, they're aggressive. And for two, they're using up resources. So you get this like huge colony of a generalist ant, and they're eating everything that they can. And a little bit later in why they're so effective, I'll talk a little bit more about the mechanism between them pushing everything out. Now, the other interesting thing is the little fire ants also associated with other serious pests. And now these are different homopterans. Now, homopterans are a subgroup of hemipterans, which are bugs, right? So these are things that feed on plants and that are pests to crops.
Are hemopterans true bugs though? Because isn't there a are they the true bugs to
So
be specific?
yeah, hemipterans are and homopterans are like grouped within them.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure, just for clarification's sake, because
Yeah.
when a lot of people refer to bugs,
Yeah.
they refer to like arthropods or Hymenoptera or anything that's an invertebrate as
Yes.
a
Yeah.
bug. So outside of my realm of knowledge, but this might be a good episode, being the first one focuses on insects, to use your knowledge to explain just a little bit, a quick brief background of true bugs versus the typical. What is the word I'm looking for? Colloquialism. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No worries. Yeah, so yes, bugs is often used to include all types of insects, even other arthropods like spiders and scorpions, which are arachnids, things like that. So now a true bug is a hemipteran, and Hemiptera is an order. So this is a one of the higher groups of taxonomy, right? That breaks it down, and they are distinguished by their sucking mouth parts. So they essentially have a a mouth that looks like a long straw, is kind of how I like to describe it to people when I'm teaching how to ID. And the reason they have that is because they feed through like a piercing and sucking behavior. So they pierce into normally plant material and then they eat it by sucking out the juices of the plant. There's a couple groups as well, mostly in Reduvidae, which are predatory, so they kind of do like a little stab and suck sort of thing as well. But yeah, so that's what essentially what separates them. And so when you're talking about bugs and actually talking about bugs, you're talking about hemipterans, which are the true bugs, and it's this group. So now homopterans are within that. So a lot of times these are like scale insects, or you'll hear mealy bugs and things like that are in this little group. Now, essentially, these guys are just really often they're pests. And this is a cool thing. I actually literally have in my notes here, yay, talk about aphid farming. So, because this is really cool. Now, this is a behavior that's found in quite a few different ants. Now, these different types of homopterans, what they do is they feed on the rich sugars of these plants, right, by sucking them out. And then their waste that they excrete is often called honeydew. That's the colloquial name for it. And it's really full of sugar.
If you guys have ever watched the Z Frank YouTube videos, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go do it. But when he says honeydew, he says honeydew. So like if he basically does a Morgan Freeman impression, but does like very detailed basic nature documentaries with information and videos provided by nature photographers and scientists. So it's a hilarious way to get some good stuff, and they have many insects. So I hope that if you haven't seen it, you guys go and check out Z Frank, ZE Frank, and I think there might be some numbers after that. If for only to hear him say honey dear.
Z Frank is incredible. He is science communication goals because he just finds this ridiculously hilarious way to get this information across. And I learn something every video, but he also just
Oh yeah.
makes these really, really ridiculous comments. It's great. Okay, sorry, reset. We're having fun today,
Yeah.
at least. That's good.
Yeah, I'm just in a goofy mood.
That's okay too. I'm sure everybody else is enjoying it, or they've stopped listening, so no problem.
And at that point, it doesn't matter. Now it's just a conversation between us.
All right. So, what is aphid farming and these farming of homopterans? Now, this is one of my favorite ant behaviors. Now, like I said, they release this honeydew, and it's even after the bug has gone ahead and digested it, it is full of sugars. It is this super, super rich substance. Now, the ants, what they do is they eat this substance because it's really good for them. It's super high energy and it's great to feed to the colony. So what they do is they actually protect and take care of these homopterans. Now it's kind of, they call it farming because it's essentially like a little farmer with his sheep and that's taking care of them and then reaping the rewards. So they protect them from other predators. They sometimes actually are seen to be moving them to different areas if they're moving their nest. And it's farming and it's really interesting because then they go ahead and eat this. And then why is this a problem? So not only are these ants causing their own whole set of issues, they are also helping to maintain and propagate these pest species. So this is a huge problem, mostly for agriculture, but also in natural systems where these different plant species are getting completely overtaken by these colonies of bugs, and the ants are helping it. And then you get a whole extra layer of this when it's an invasive bug. So you get these true bugs in here that are invasive being protected and propagated and increased by an invasive ant. So this is the like whole layer of this.
I feel like I know something about this, so I want to say something because otherwise I might not have any more input for the rest of the episode. So I think that a great example of this would be ladybugs and aphids, because I think everybody knows growing up, if you watch like the Magic School Bus or any nature documentary or read a like just general nature book, we knew that ladybugs were beneficial because they eat aphids. So therefore, regardless of whether or not you know what aphids do, you know that they're not beneficial to the plants that they are on. So if you've got these fire ants that are protecting them on top of a species that's in decline, like the ladybug, because again, it's being outcompeted by introduced beetles that are the little orange ones that you guys have probably seen. I guess maybe coming to an episode near you soon. I don't know. That one's not planned, but it could be. Then you've got more of a decline in food availability for an already under pressure species. So it's not even just negative effects on crops or negative effects on an ecosystem. It's negative effects on top of other negative effects caused by other anthropomorphic It's a giant conspiracy. We have fucked this planet so hard. You understand why it's so ridiculous. Just how ecosystems work together. Ecosystems are good at combating one another and fighting. So if you've got a bunch of good fighting species like invasives, it's going to be more detrimental and exacerbate and explode and become more exponential and some other synonym. And it's ridiculous to think just how much pressure we're putting on what's left of our very few native ecosystems. Man, I need a nap. That was a lot.
Right, right. Okay, you take a breath. No, and you're 100% right. Like, I think all of us at some point have wanted to explode about this because it doesn't just start and stop with one species. So, yeah, these ladybugs, if they're coming and trying to eat these aphids, these ants are fighting them off because it's like their little sheep. It's like their little bug sheep. Which I know
Yes.
I'm talking about it about how cool and cute it is, and it is a problem. But if you think about these guys, because we do want to also provide the perspective that it's not their fault, right? So if you look at these guys in their native habitat, this is a super cool behavior that in their non-native habitat becomes a huge problem.
I think I'm slowly becoming Joe Rogan, which is not the goal that I set when we started making this podcast. So I need to reel it back in and regather myself a little bit more.
Compose yourself, Nicholas. Compose yourself.
Right.
It's okay. It's not live, so you guys couldn't see the actual the hands. There was a lot of hands.
Oh, I was almost just parading around my apartment and throwing things at that point.
Okay, so here's that issue with the propagation of these bugs, and then also back to the ants in Lubin 1984, kind of an old paper I know, but it showed that these guys actually have a negative impact in at least 17 of 28 species of ants that they were looking at in this site. And then they weren't even just affecting other ground species and arachnids, but even the flying insects. So they really cause a lot of problems. And something too that's interesting, especially this is really pronounced in the Galapagos ecosystem, is they're actually harming young tortoises, birds, and turtles as well. So they can get into the nests of these little young reptiles and birds, and they eat away at the eyes, and they cause infections, and they are killing these super important species that are already, again, species that are endangered, that are already having their own issues. So it goes beyond just the insect and the other arthropod interactions as well, that they get into sea turtle nests, they get into tortoise nests, into bird nests, and just totally destroy them. And then as well, looking at the human aspect of it, like I already mentioned agriculture, that it's harming our agriculture in the fact of these pests, and then also with workers, right? So if you're out here and you're picking fruit in a farm with these fire ants, it is horrible, right? So their sting is really irritating. It can cause major rashes. It hurts, and it's really disturbing these workers. They actually, in places where fire ants are present, there usually is like a premium wage to go and pick fruits, because people won't do it unless they're getting paid a lot, because you are going to get stung. And then also too, this is causing tourism and recreation issues. I was just looking at a quick on YouTube, the link in the show notes, the little fire ants in Hawaii documentary. There's a lady saying that you can't go down to the beach anymore because she knows they're there and they come up on your blankets and cause problems. And then as well, which was a great thing seeing from this lady, is she's saying she can't go down there because she knows she's probably going to pick them up from the beach and spread them to somewhere else. So it's actually just disrupting these people's connection with nature, which is so important that we go out and enjoy these habitats. But if you have these swarms of fire ants causing problems, that's problems directly for economic values, for tourism, and just people in their own backyards that can't go enjoy themselves. Along this line too, we have problems with pets. Now, several dogs and cats actually develop this like corneal clouding, and they actually go blind because they get like so much interaction with these ants that are stinging them around their eyes and causing problems. Now, on a side note, keep your fucking cats inside anyways. However, this is a problem. I think in my search on a Polynesian island as well, which wasn't my focus, the locals noted that all of their dogs went blind, and none of them lived longer than 5 years, because they were sniffing around in vegetation and they would get attacked by these fire ants and develop all of these crazy problems. So it's not even just in the quote unquote just in the natural aspect of things. Like, people are being directly impacted by them, which is just as important at the end of the day, realistically.
It sounds like you've got biological impacts, ecological impacts, economic impacts, and cultural impacts. If it's preventing people who live in Hawaii from enjoying their connection to nature, or wherever else they're invasive, and causing that problem. So that's pretty across the board as an invasive species that meets all of the standards to be one of the worst invasive species of all time, which is obviously a bad thing. But I would imagine that because of that, it probably promotes more eradication and attention that are beneficial to the removal and hopefully eradication of this species from additional areas.
Right. That's something that is a point I did want to bring up too. So thank you. That, yeah, the only positive to this being such a horrible pest and problem to actually people and pets as well is people actually care. So people are definitely putting more money and more time into these different methods that we'll get into very shortly. So we talked about all the problems that this ant is causing, but why is it a good invasive? Now, lots of the info I got was from Wetter and Porter 2003, which is a really awesome review on the little fire ant, and then a couple of the other sources that are listed. So first one that we kind of mentioned already is they transport so easily. They are teeny, teeny, tiny, and they are super tough little bastards. Like we said, they float, they get stuck in things. Ants are so durable, and they come on fruits, on plants, in the carpets of cars, in luggage, on building materials, on everything. Then they are generalists. So they can eat whatever and they can nest wherever. So this just leaves a really high opportunity. Now, a lot of types of ants need to create these really intricate underground nests, but these guys are found in lumber, they're found on palm leaves, they're found in all kinds of places. So generalist in their feeding behavior and in their nesting behavior. So that also helps them just have lots of habitats and food available to them. Then they're also really territorial against other species. Now, this is where they're getting rid of the different ant species, different arachnids, and that kind of thing. They shoo them out. Now, the interesting part of this is that they have high interspecific aggression, right? So interspecific between species, but they have really low intraspecific aggression, which is within the same species. Now, why is this a problem, right? Because they kick out all the other species, but you can have multiple colonies in one area not harming each other. Most ants, even intraspecifically, fight off other ants. So you get kind of this competition that lowers the population because you get one colony of ants in one area. But these guys, you get this kind of community going along. And then you also have this polygyny, the multiple queens, right? So you have multiple colonies and multiple queens, and it's kind of like this metropolis of little fire ants, essentially. So they get to grow and grow in these areas. It's super interesting.
So would that be an example of an actual example of what a super colony is, which is just essentially multiple populations of ants living together over an extended space?
Yeah, essentially that's what you're getting. And even within their native range, it seems like they do have multiple queens in a nest. But then so you're getting a nest with multiple queens and a nest right next door with other queens as well. And yes, you're getting this super colony or ant metropolis. And then another reason that this makes them such good invasives is it's really easy for them to bud off. So, for example, a queen or two queens and a big group of workers can kind of break off from where they're at and go to a new space and create a new colony. And they can do this so much easier because normally if a colony is going to move, which does happen, the queen moves with all of her worker ants and everything, and they start a new space. But you get the ants where they are and moving into another place, and they just keep propagating, and there's more and more and more of them.
I'd like to just take a moment to show just how much of a nerd I am and reference the fact that you basically just summarized the entire latter half of an anime called Hunter x Hunter.
Nerd alert!
So it's actually a incredibly accurate representation of how these invasive species are spreading, just in a much more personified and anime-esque nature. So that's really cool, actually, to hear that there is. I mean, obviously, it's not cool in how detrimental it is, but it's cool to hear how effective they are at spreading and colonizing. And really, they are just a great example of what makes invasive species invasive.
Exactly. Top 100, baby. Also, anybody who's trying to procrastinate studying for an ecology final but still wants to watch some anime, apparently you can check out Hunter x Hunter.
There's like 150 episodes, so procrastinate away.
Buckle up. All right. And then we're almost through the reasons that make them so invasive. So I kind of mentioned their generalist behavior already, but they do really well in nesting in human stuff that's left around. So like in old lumber and any of these kinds of things, they don't need these really intricate nests. So they just move around so easily. And they, you have a big log that's been sitting in your yard for a while, and these ants colonize it, and you move it somewhere else, and they're going along with it. And then if any got left behind, they're probably starting a new nest right there. So, and then the other thing too is Bueno and Fowler, 1994, found that Wasmannia auropunctata was the only native ant species that was in the area that they were studying, not easily controlled with conventional insecticides. So they're also resistant to a lot of kind of insecticides as well. And then looking at Coolin et al. 2009, they checked out their thermal tolerance range, and it's really huge. So not only do they do well kind of in cooler temperatures, but they also do well in high temperatures. So this is them colonizing greenhouses in Canada, colonizing other neotropical areas, and just doing what they do and doing it way too well. I think this is a great time for us to take a quick break. So we will see you guys when we get back.
Woo! Thank you for joining us for the first half of this episode of The Anthropocene. We're going to take a short break.
The Anthropocene is an independent project by young ecologists hoping to educate and share interesting information about introduced species around the world. If you'd like to help us by sponsoring an episode, check out the links in the show notes. And we're back. All right, so we have talked about the little fire ant, all the problems it's causing, why it is such an incredible invasive species, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about it. What are some of the control methods? All right, so first things first, of course, insecticides. Now, there's The insecticide, of course, is a poison used to kill specifically insects. So there's various kinds that have been used, and these will probably continue to change. Like at one point, DDT was a huge thing that was used for them, but obviously now we know that these have super detrimental effects on bird populations, so those aren't being used anymore. But yes, they continue to change. One that is being used a lot and especially referenced in the controls for Galapagos is hydromethanin. This is being used and it's been really effective. And so far, the impacts on the environment do seem quite low. Of course, you're getting some negative impacts on other arthropods and other ants in the area, but when we're dealing with these kind of invasive species, there has to be some sacrifices to get rid of them, unfortunately. Now, this is just a good time to note because a lot of people listening could even have little fire ants as a problem. Don't try to control it yourself without proper research, because if you're just going and spraying your entire yard or this huge tree with insecticide everywhere, you're killing beneficial insects, you're poisoning the ground, you could be poisoning the water, your pets, people. So make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you talk to somebody professional that knows what's going on, or look at your recommendations. For people in Hawaii, or maybe not even there, the stoptheant.org, they have a bunch of really awesome resources that you guys can check out. So just be careful about what you're doing.
One thing that just to expand upon what you just said, if you're doing any sort of pest control, do your research, because you might go to somebody who is a licensed pest controller and they might not be using the most ethical or the best management practices. Not all of the unethical practices are unlawful, to very undersell that. And many control methods are very, very detrimental to other species. I'm thinking just off the top of my head in regards to insects and ants, bait traps, which can both increase tolerance to animals and are proven to not be that effective, but also have a ton of negative drawbacks because they're relatively non-selective and they can draw in beneficial insects as bycatch, which you obviously don't want doing. So yeah, it's best to do your research on topics like that. And of course, with anything, the more you know, the better you're going to be able to do it, and the more appropriately you're going to be able to do it.
Right. Along that line, some of these insecticides and stuff spoken about in the control methods are used with bait traps, unfortunately, but sometimes it's just the best that they can do. Now, just as a fun fact, little fire ants love peanut butter. That is their favorite bait. And like, dude, same, delicious. But without insecticide.
I just ate a whole jar of peanut butter previous to recording this episode. I would not do well if I was a fire ant.
I'm not sure if I'm disgusted or impressed or.
How'd you do that? It's actually, I'm not even mad. That's amazing.
Along the lines of trying to find like more ethical and better control methods, there's this really cool thing called methoprene, which is an insect juvenile hormone analog. And by spraying this, what it does is it actually reduces the fecundity, or like fertility, the ability of an organism to have babies, of the queens. So it makes that go down, or it renders them infertile. So this essentially is just stopping the queens from having more babies and producing more ants, and you're not actually killing anything. So this is kind of a cool, when it's able to be used, it's nice, because obviously, like, I mean, there's a lot of things surrounded with arthropods on whether they feel pain or not, but if you can go ahead without killing something and just let them slowly die out without reproducing more, I think that's a super really interesting and really cool control method, personally. Now, various islands in the Galapagos have used kind of a combo chemical and burn. So similar to in the grass episode where you're burning stuff down and then putting chemicals. That helped to eradicate the first time in Santa Fe. And then they did come back, and then they had to go ahead and use this hydromethanon and go ahead and get rid of them. But that's been a really good, like, happy case there. And then the good thing about this is lots of treatments are applied site by site and really carefully. And it's like this, you're spraying either these hormones or these insecticides in nest sites. And it's not this like over clouding spray, which is a really good sign to see. And progress is being seen in both Galapagos and Hawaii. There's different places that are being treated, all these major sites where they've been found, and it's working. So that's really great. Now, the cool thing about this too, especially in all the places I'm looking for Hawaii with Stop the Ant and these great documentaries. They're really emphasizing the importance of local collaboration, of just local people. So people just reporting when they see these ants, people from anywhere where this is a problem. There's different organizations. You guys just do a little quick Google and figure out where you could go to. But if you think you have an invasive ant, you collect it, freeze it, send it in, and then you are helping not only add to the reports for having where they are, but people can come out and apply treatments or anything like that. So the local collaboration is everything in terms of that. And then two, in the prevention, which I'll get into just in one sec here.
Yeah, that's a great example of citizen science. And citizen science is science. Scientists, official scientists, can't necessarily do all the science themselves. So crowdsourcing information from people who are not necessarily within the field or have the ability to be in the field right now, but giving additional information to the scientists is so important to conservation, because obviously as a scientist, they can't do it all by themselves. We need to work with the public and be able to expand conservation on a global scale. Everybody should be doing science to some degree. We don't all have to be running the statistics or collecting data or whatever, but any little submission is information that can expand the range of an animal, help preventative methods in the future and things like that. And some of the biggest invasive species prevention methods are based on initial discoveries by people who are not official scientists. So just because you're not a by career scientist doesn't mean you can't play your own part in it.
Exactly. Yeah, everybody can help out. So do what you can. And unfortunately, these guys can't be identified without a microscope, but you can collect them with peanut butter and send them in. And then on that note as well, prevention. This is a huge thing. Like Nicholas already mentioned, just being so careful about what you're bringing where and what might be hitching a ride on your clothes, in your car, on the fruit that you're moving. And then as well, just we have a need to like really be careful in quarantine. So in these island places, there's really careful checks and balances between airports and different ferries to check over fruits. The main thing is, unfortunately, these places lack a lot of resource and they don't have enough officers going through and checking a lot of these fruits and things coming in, but they're getting better and better at it. And especially because people do care and see the horrible impact of these ants, that it's a thing. Really cool is ant sniffing dogs that they have. So they've trained these dogs to find little fire ants. So just like bomb sniffing dogs or drug sniffing dogs, these dogs find ants. And so they go ahead.
Or turtle sniffing dogs.
Turtle sniffing dogs. There's dogs that sniff whale poop.
There's probably dogs that sniff other dogs. That's all dogs, I guess.
Yes, but dogs are such an important part of conservation in so many ways. It's really interesting. So in the checks in the airport and the ferry and stuff, they have dogs to go through and check just like they would for drugs or any other thing too. So with really careful airport checks, restricting certain imported goods as well that are more common to have these kind of things on them really helps. Quick anecdote, when I went to Galapagos, they actually, when you come inside the cabin, they spray everything down with this insecticide that's supposedly not harmful to people, but they spray in all of the cabins and they spray the luggage down underneath as well to make sure that you're not bringing anything with you. You have to go through and put your shoes through solution, and it's really great. So they're working really hard now that we are starting to see all these problems. We're working harder on the prevention so we don't have to work so hard on the control and the eradication later. The good news, eradication is possible. Like I said, Santa Fe, in Galapagos, they got rid of them even in 1990. We're seeing really good results in a lot of different places around the world. They're not on every island in Hawaii as well, so the prevention measures are showing good results. People care, and you're really seeing people that are doing this citizen science and doing what they can to prevent this. So this is the good news, that even though this guy is a really good invasive species, maybe we'll be able to one day get their numbers down to a place that we don't have to worry about them so much anymore. Great. So I think that wraps up everything I had about the little fire ants. So I guess this now leads us into the debate round.
Oh, I'm leaving that in. Okay, so we're going to pretend we're in a world where I know nothing about insects, which turns out to be this very reality. And now I'm going to play the devil's advocate and use essentially what you just told me against you, and see if if you can combat it and throw it back at me and basically diffuse any probably common arguments against invasive species management in regards to ants. Of course, as you discussed previously, is probably not necessarily something that's going to be as common with this topic, being that they are such an aggressive and detrimental species on pretty much every level imaginable. But
Right.
that being said, you talked about how these ants are pretty much non-discriminate predators and things like that. Is there a chance that these animals could be used as pest control in certain places? So reducing like other negative insects, including potentially other invasive insects. And then that way you might have a crop that wouldn't be harmed by that particular parasitic insect that may be more beneficial.
Right, right. So essentially, you just say they're aggressive enough, they're kicking out all these other insects, and that can be a good thing. Interestingly, in the Witter and Porter, they actually did some reports of this ant in Africa as well, and this guy was moved around on purpose after it was there, like introduced on accident. It was moved around on purpose because it was actually a really good pest control for things like corn, which aren't as impacted by true bugs, like things because they don't have as much like squishy, delicious material. However, at the end of the day, for one, the people collecting this stuff have to deal with the fire ants, and we've already talked about how horrible these stings are. And then as well too, as much as we like to go ahead and play around with these things and introduce insects as pest control, if they're not native, at the end of the day, I don't know, 90% of the time, fake statistic, they are causing more harm than good. So what we need to do is we need to find native biocontrol and native things that can help reduce pest insects, because that is definitely, biocontrol is a great thing, but not with invasive species, because it's always going to cause more problems than good later down the road.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I can think of a situation where invasive species were successfully controlled by using another invasive species where that species then did not itself become invasive, or in a lot of scenarios it did nothing to control the invasive species and then also established as an invasive species, so then you have a 2-for-1 deal on invasive species. So on my next point would be, we as a species have created so much disturbance in ecosystems throughout the world, and there's so much species decline. Could these ants theoretically fill a predatory niche that is no longer there by whatever native species has been affected or reduced to the point where it's ecologically and functionally extinct?
Right. So ants are super important in their ecosystem. So not only as predators, but they also a lot of times are detrivores, cleaning up like dead bugs and other leaves and stuff. So it's really important to have ants. So if we get an ant eradicated and these guys are filling in the niche, like maybe that is just as good. But again, this kind of comes back to the same point where we need to just focus on finding a way to remove the source of the issue that got rid of our original native species and make sure that we're putting efforts into having these guys, like replacing them with something that is non-native just doesn't go well. And the interesting thing is, I think part of why we've had so many native species or invasive species around the world is the first couple years it looks great and they control these things and they take over a niche that maybe was empty, and it's like, oh, these guys are really helping out, and it just later down the road is going to cause more issues.
Right. I mean, I guess you can kind of think of it as like two separate puzzles. If you're missing a piece from one puzzle, you can't necessarily take a piece from another puzzle. It might be the same general shape or something like that, but you really got to smash it in there, and there's going to be some overlap. So there's no perfect fit by just placing a completely different species in that niche and hoping that it'll be successful, because yeah, it might occupy the same predation rate or utilize some of the same resources, but it's going to require other resources that the initial one didn't have, or it's not going to be predated upon or affected in the same way that other one would have. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic rebuttal for that devil's advocate thing.
At the end of the day, we
And
just need to work better on keeping ecosystems the way that they were and let them do their thing.
right, conservation and preservation and
Exactly.
prevention, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all I've got for you as far as questions. I'm sorry I don't really have more. I just my knowledge is very, very limited on this subject. So I'm kind of grasping at straws here. I think you did a really good job at covering the topic very well, and I think it's super applicable to other ant species that are invasive because, as you know, I mean, I referenced the Argentinian ants that are more of a northern United States problem, and I think that a lot of the same preventative and ecological issues caused by these ants are overlap with a lot of the principles and terms that you discussed with the little fire ants.
Right, for sure. I love ants. I think they're so interesting. And of course, for this episode, we had to talk about why these guys are a problem. But if you ever want to just learn about crazy different types of niche partitioning and ecology, ants are where it's at. Like, there is so much interesting to learn. And of course, we do get some of this overlap. And the really invasive ants, yeah, they're all aggressive. They bud off really well. Most of the time, they have these like horrible socioeconomic impacts as well. And yeah, it's a big problem. And they're so hardy and they're so good at surviving. So that's really what causes the problem at the end of the day. But maybe, I mean, at some point, we'll probably revisit ants another day because, you know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, these are species that you've worked with and you've encountered personally, and I'm sure there's other species of ants that maybe some of the listeners would like to see us address in the future. And if that's the case, then, you know, if we're doing this for a while, sure, drop some comments on suggestions of ants or other invasive insect species you want to see us cover. We have a already increasingly long list of species that we want to cover, thanks to suggestions from you, as well as just our own backgrounds and things like that. One little housekeeping thing I want to talk about before we end today is we're also looking at getting some experts involved in this podcast, having scientists who are specifically studying these invasive species become a part of the interview process and the back and forth process that we have here. We might utilize that in the near future, or we might reserve those for more special episodes. But that being said, we do have a few people lined up. And if you're listening and you have a background or you're studying invasive species or invasive species removal, and you would like to be a part of an episode of this podcast, absolutely reach out to us through any of our social media. If you would rather talk to Kirsten than me because I'm scary and just a ball of energy, and you want somebody who's maybe a little bit more analytical, reach out to her through her social media. If you want to regret your decisions, reach out to me. But either way, we're more than happy to have experts come on here and pad our own knowledge with their very, very specific knowledge. Because as ecologists, I like to say that we know a little about a lot. So many different topics, but no real focused energy in any specific area.
You could say that
Speaking for myself.
You could say that we're getting Antsy to speak to you.
Oh. See ya.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.